It is the year 1781. The American Revolution has been bleeding for 6 long years. The men who started this fight were full of fire and dreams. Now they are exhausted, starving, and broken. Britain controls the seas. Britain controls the South. Britain has the most powerful military force on the face of the earth. And the American army, ragged, unpaid, and falling apart, appears to have lost. But history has a way of turning at the very last moment. In the coming weeks, on a small peninsula in Virginia, everything will change. One battle, one trap, one storm, and the most powerful military force of its time will face a defeat nobody saw coming. This is Yorktown, 1781, the battle that gave birth to a nation. By 1781, the Continental Army was silently falling to pieces. Soldiers had not been paid in months. Their boots had holes. Their coats were falling apart in the winter cold. Men were disappearing in the night, slipping away, going home, giving up on a revolution that felt impossible to win. Even George Washington, the man who had carried this army through years of loss and heartbreak, was privately running out of hope. He wrote desperate letters to Congress, begging for money, begging for food, begging for ammunition. The letters went unanswered. Meanwhile, British General Charles Cornwallis was marching through the American South like a man who had already won the war. Georgia had fallen, South Carolina had fallen, North Carolina had fallen, and now Cornwallis and his 8,000 elite soldiers were marching deep into Virginia, the heart of America itself. Cornwallis needed to rest and resupply. He needed a port where British ships could reach him with food, weapons, and reinforcements. He chose a quiet little tobacco town sitting on a peninsula along the Chesapeake Bay, a place almost nobody had ever heard of. A place called Yorktown. On the surface, it seemed like a perfectly reasonable choice. The town was defensible, the water was nearby, help could come by sea. But Cornwallis had made one fatal miscalculation. He had chosen a peninsula, land surrounded by water on 3 sides. And if someone were to take control of that water, his entire army would be locked inside a trap, with no way out and nowhere to run. He had just marched 8,000 of Britain's finest soldiers into a dead end, and he had absolute. Far to the north, George Washington received a secret letter that changed the entire course of the war. French Admiral François de Grasse was sailing north from the Caribbean with 28 warships and 3,000 soldiers. He was heading straight for the Chesapeake Bay. Washington immediately saw what this meant. If de Grasse could seal off the water around Yorktown, Cornwallis could not escape and could not receive a single reinforcement. The trap was possible, but Washington had to move immediately, and he had to move without anyone finding out. The British had thousands of soldiers stationed in New York City watching his every move. One mistake, one leak, one whisper reaching the wrong ears, and Cornwallis would be warned. The moment would be gone, and the revolution could be lost forever. So Washington did something that belongs in the history books all by itself. He built fake campsites near New York. He constructed fake supply depots. He wrote fake letters and deliberately allowed them to fall into British hands, all suggesting the attack on New York was still coming any day. And while British commanders were watching the decoys and waiting for an attack that was never going to happen, Washington quietly and secretly marched 7,000 French and American soldiers 450 miles south. It remains one of the most brilliant military deceptions ever pulled off. Meanwhile, a young French general named Lafayette, only 23 years old, had been shadowing Cornwallis across Virginia with a smaller force. He could not defeat Cornwallis directly, but he was fast enough to keep him from running. Lafayette sent word to Washington, "I cannot beat him, but I promise you, he will not escape." On September 5th, 1781, British Admiral Graves sailed into the Chesapeake Bay with 19 warships. He expected open water. Instead, he found Admiral de Grasse and 28 French warships already formed up and waiting for battle. What followed was one of the most important naval battles in all of world history, and almost no one today knows its name. The two fleets hammered each other with cannon fire for hours. The British took serious damage. And then, Admiral Graves made the decision that would seal the fate of an entire army. He turned around. He retreated back to New York and left Cornwallis completely alone. The bay was now fully under French control. No British ship could enter. No reinforcements could arrive. No escape route existed by sea. By late September, 17,000 French and American troops had completely encircled Yorktown. Washington ordered a siege. Night after night, soldiers dug trenches through the dark, pushing closer and closer to the British walls without a sound. Then, on October 9th, Washington personally lit the fuse on the opening cannon of the Great Bombardment. Hundreds of cannons opened fire and did not stop. By late September, 17,000 French and American troops had completely encircled Yorktown. Washington ordered a siege. Night after night, soldiers dug trenches through the dark, pushing closer and closer to the British walls without a sound. Then, on October 9th, Washington personally lit the fuse on the opening cannon of the Great Bombardment. Hundreds of cannons opened fire and did not stop. Day and night, night and day, the ground shook constantly. British fortifications cracked and crumbled under the pressure. But two heavily defended positions, known as Redoubts 9 and 10, still blocked the path to final victory. They had to be stormed by hand, in pitch darkness, using only bayonets. That assault was given to a young, fearless American officer who had spent years waiting for a moment exactly like this. His name was Alexander Hamilton. On the night of October 14th, Hamilton led his men forward in complete silence. Redoubt 10 fell in 10 minutes. Cornwallis made one final desperate attempt to save his army. He loaded his soldiers onto boats under the cover of darkness, hoping to cross the river and break free before dawn. Then, the storm came. The boats were thrown apart by wind and waves. The crossing became impossible. It was over. On October 19th, 1781, 8,000 British soldiers marched out of Yorktown and laid down their weapons. According to historical accounts, as the British troops surrendered, their band played a song called "The World Turned Upside Down." They could not have chosen a more fitting tune. When the news reached London, the British Prime Minister reportedly collapsed in shock and cried out, "It is all over." 2 years later, Britain signed the Treaty of Paris, formally recognizing the United States of America as a free and independent nation. One battle, one trap, one storm, and the world was never the same again.
My video, please hit the subscribe button and follow us for more documentaries video. Thank you very much.